One of the really key things, when you go to the rallies, most of the press, as you know, stays in a press cage. And I think there needs to be kind of more of an engagement with people. And we need to look at these rallies not so much as political events, but as religious rituals. And then you discover that although the sort of the QAnon believers, that's a small subset, those ideas have sort of infiltrated the much broader movement. I mean, Trump checks them from the stage, talking about things that he can't tell you, talking about invisible enemies. A real moment for me, I was talking to one woman, and she was deeply invested in QAnon. And like a surprising number of people, she believed that not only are the Democrats elite, invested in child trafficking, they're actually invested in cannibalism. So I turned to the people around me who weren't, they were not, you know, they had gone to that one rally. There weren't people who were on the Trump trail. And I said, do you believe this? And some said, well, it's hard to say. I don't know. You know, no one was saying, that's crazy. That's insane. It was all within the realm of possibility once you had abandoned that. And then Trump comes on stage and he starts talking about horrible, horrible stories. I mean, really gory violence. He spins out for a long time and he says, there's more I can't tell you. And that they experience as confirmation of their beliefs.
Right. It's an incredible piece of work, Jeff Charlotte. It's in Vanity Fair. You should definitely check it out. Thank you so much for making some time with us tonight.
Thank you, Chris.
Coming up, Dr. Ashish Jha on the steadily climbing number of coronavirus cases in the U.S. and why experts around the world are watching with alarm.
Rack it up with Rakuten. Sign up today and get cash back on everything you buy.
As we see new coronavirus outbreaks spreading in cities and states across the country, we appear to have also reached an inflection point, an important one, with the disease. You see, for a very long time, there were these two offsetting trends. The areas with the biggest early outbreaks, like the New York metro area, were declining quite rapidly in terms of the new cases, while places that were not very hard hit initially were rising, although kind of slowly. And together, they sort of cancel each other out, right? It looks like we have crossed over that national divide. It has been for several weeks that we've had a case count that just kind of plateaued and held steady. We've now crossed into a new phase where cases nationally are once again rising in the aggregate. Now, here's the thing. All the other major Western countries have clamped down on the virus, and not us. The red line in this graph is the European Union, and the blue line is the United States. And you can see how the European Union, like us, peaked around 30,000 new cases per day, right around the same time we did. Now, the whole European Union is averaging around only 4,000 new cases per day. The United States hasn't broken below 20,000 new cases and is now on its way back up. And part of what makes that chart so frustrating, so maddening, is that for a while, Europe was sort of in the same position we were. I mean, at the beginning of the outbreak, they did not do a great job either. We watched as hospitals in Italy were just overrun, and the disease then hit Spain and France and Sweden, the UK, no longer part of the EU, of course. And yes, we were a basket case, but so was most of Europe. And people here, even on this program, we used to look at the countries that had done a really bang-up great job, right, that had contained the virus, like South Korea and Taiwan and New Zealand and Australia. And we would say, well, we can never have success like them. Our cultures are too different, and we didn't experience SARS firsthand, and we're not an island like New Zealand and Taiwan and Singapore. So the last refuge for comparison, when you looked at how the U.S. was handling this, it was that Europe was there and also struggling. And it was a way of making ourselves feel better about how we were dealing with the virus. That is now gone, okay? Europe has suppressed the virus, and we have not. We are doing a terrible job containing this pandemic, arguably worse than anywhere in the world, with the exception right now of Brazil. In fact, countries who have contained the virus are now concerned about our growing rise in cases. One infectious disease specialist in New Zealand told the Washington Post, quote, "It really does feel like the U.S. has given up." And we should be worried, because if there's one thing we've learned about the disease already, as we have gone through this, it's that it has a very long fuse. I remember very distinctly speaking into this camera back in early March, as more and more cases were confirmed here every day, noting that it was strange how few people were dying from the disease at that point. And experts would say, just wait, look at Italy, look at Spain. And by mid-April, the coronavirus was the leading cause of death in this country, ahead of cancer and ahead of heart disease. I have that feeling again watching the cases grow in Arizona and Texas and Florida. That moment between the lightning and the thunder, wondering when we're going to feel the force of the skies above us. I hope I'm wrong, but I fear it's all happening again.
If you buy a 2020 Volkswagen today,
is streaming, and it's free. TV, movies, sports, news, docs, tunes, and more. You can't not watch.
So here's what the coronavirus outbreak looks like right now in Arizona. You can see how the bars for new cases shoot up there at the far end, how the line for the 7-day average keeps climbing higher and higher. In Texas, you can see how the curve never really got flattened. Instead, that 7-day average has been moving higher and higher for weeks. In Florida, they are experiencing exponential growth, setting new records almost daily. Today alone, there were over 3,800 new cases. That's almost 6 times what they were recording at the beginning of the month. We're now in a new phase of this pandemic. It's not a second wave, but it is the point at which states are opening back up, even though we haven't suppressed the virus. Now, the virus is starting to grow, and what happens next? No one really knows. And here to help me get my head around what's going on, someone I always learn from whenever we speak, Dr. Ashish Jha, a professor of global health and the director of the Harvard Global Health Institute. So, Dr. Jha, this is how I thought we would do this. I'm gonna appoint myself the optimist here and try to throw out a number of optimistic scenarios about what we're seeing, and I want to hear your response because so the first optimistic scenario is, even though we're seeing rates of growth that are very high, the actual overall levels are still relatively low. We're not dealing with levels like what we saw in the New York outbreak. What do you think of that?
So, Chris, thanks for having me on. I like that idea. It's true that we're not where New York was, but the problem of exponential growth is once it starts growing and gets momentum, it becomes very hard to slow down and stop. And so the trend here is very concerning, and we can reach very high levels very quickly if we don't begin to head this off.
The other idea is that when we saw the crazy levels of exponential growth, right? When this thing went through Wuhan, then Lombardy and New York, the sort of 3 worst outbreaks probably in the world, maybe Madrid as well. You didn't have any kind of real social distancing in place. No one saw the thing coming. You didn't have masks. You didn't have like the basic advanced preparation for what this thing can do. And you had an R, the transmission number of around 3 that maybe you can get it to over 1, but nothing like that. And then that's a kind of like survivable or deal withable level of growth.
Yeah, so I don't think we're going to deal with that kind of an outbreak in this country, hopefully, for the rest of this pandemic. But let's play out the kind of the, RT of 1.2 or 1.1. You still get hospitals starting to get overwhelmed, which is what we're seeing right now. In several places, Arizona's hospitals are starting to get full, a lot of places in Florida, parts of Texas, and that just keeps going. So then you have choices, like you got to do masks, you got to start peeling back some of the relaxations you've had, you've got to ramp up testing and tracing and isolation. And at some point, Chris, if you don't do enough of those things, then you really are looking at shelter in place again. So we may not have another Lombardy-style outbreak here, but we've got to get on top of this, or we're going to be looking at shelter in place as our only solution.
Well, and we should note, this Apple news today to me was striking because I think it sort of marks a kind of first, which is that they basically are closing a bunch of retail stores. So this is, I think, it's like the first step back. It's the first kind of moment of retrenchment we've seen here in the U.S. We've seen other places do this. South Korea had to do it. We've seen Singapore had to do it. We've seen China had to do it. Beijing just closed its schools. It's not like we're the only ones do this. But that Apple moment to me was a striking one where it's like, it's not all going to go in one direction for the duration of this pandemic.
Yeah, so to me, that Apple store closing thing, a couple of things. First of all, it's a reality, it's a reminder that whatever policymakers do, even if governors or legislatures are in denial, businesses have to deal with the reality on the ground. And the second part is